Chapter 8 of The Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Grimly, Buck Kendall looked at the reports. McLaurin stood beside him. Devin sat across the table from him. "What do you make of it, Buck?" asked the commander. "That we have just one island of resistance left on the Jovian worlds, and that will, I fear, vanish. They haven't finished with their arsenal by any means." "But what was it, man? What was it that ruined those ships?" "Vibration. Somehow, Lord only knows how it's done, they can project electric fields. These projected fields are oscillated, and they are tuned in with some parts of the ship. I suspect they are crystals of the metals. If they can start a vibration in the crystals of the metal, that's fatigue. Metal fatigue enormously speeded. You know how a quartz crystal oscillator in a radio control apparatus will break if you work on it a very heavy load at the peak. They simply smash the crystals of metal in the same way, only they project their field." "Then our toughest metals are useless. Can't something tough rather than hard, like copper or even silver for instance, stand it?" "Calcium metal's the toughest going, and even that would break under the beating those ships give it. The only way to withstand it is to have such a mass of metal that the oscillations are damped out. But—" The set tuned in on the IP station on Europa was speaking again. "The ships are returning. There are 129 by accurate count. Jorgensen reports that telescopic observation of the dead on the fallen cruiser shows them to be a completely unhuman race. They are of mottled coloring, predominantly grayish brown. The ships are returning. They have divided into 10 groups, 9 groups of 2 each, and a main body of the rest of the fleet. The group of 18 is descending within range, and we are focusing our beams on them." Out by Europa, 10 great UV beams were stabbing angrily toward 10 great interstellar ships. The metal of the hulls glowed brilliant and distorted slowly as the thick walls softened under the heat, and the air behind pressed against it. Grimly the 10 ships came on. Torpedoes were being launched and exploded, and now they had no effect, for the Mirans within were protected. The 18 grouped ships separated and arranged themselves in a circle around the fort. Suddenly one staggered as a great puff of gas shot out through the thin atmosphere of Europa to flare brilliantly in the lash of the stabbing UV beam. Instantly the ship righted itself and labored upward. Another dropped to take its place, and the great walls of the IP fort suddenly groaned and started in their welded joints. The faint whispering rustle of the crumbling beam was murmuring through the station. Engineers shouted suddenly as meters leapt the length of their scales and the needles clicked softly on the stop pins. A thin rustle came from the atostors grouped in the great power room. "Spirits of space, a revolving magnetic field!" roared the chief technician. "They're making this whole blasted station a squirrel cage." The mighty walls of 8-foot metal shuddered and trembled. The UV beams lashed out from the fort in quivering arcs now, and they did not hold their aim steady, and the magnetic shield that protected them from atomic bombs was working and straining wildly. 18 great ships quivered and tugged outside there now, straining with all their power to remain in the same spot. As they passed from one to another, the magnetic impulses that were now creating a titanic magnetic vortex about the fort. "The atostors will be exhausted in another 15 minutes," the chief technician roared into his transmitter. "Can the signals get through those fields, Commander?" "No, Mac, they've been stopped. Sparks tells me we're here, and let's hope we stay. What's happening?" "They've got a revolving magnetic field out there that would spin a minor planet. The whole blasted fort is acting like the squirrel cage in an induction motor. They've made us an armature in a 500 million horsepower electric motor." "They can't tear this place loose, can they?" "I don't know. It was never—" The Chief stopped. Outside a terrific roar and crash had built up. White darts of flame leapt 1,000 feet into the air, hurling terrific masses of shattered rock and soil. "I was going to say," the Chief went on, "this place wasn't designed for that sort of a strain. Our own magnetic field is supporting us now, preventing their magnetic field from getting its teeth on metal. When the strain comes, well, they're cutting loose our foundation with atomic bombs." 5 UV beams were combined on one interstellar ship. Instantly the great machine retreated, and another dropped in to take its place, while the magnetic field spun on uninterruptedly. "Can they keep that up long?" "God knows, but they have 100 and more ships to send in when the power of one gives out, remember. What's our reserve now?" The Chief paused a moment to look at the meters. "Half what it was 10 minutes ago." Commander Wallace sent some other orders. Every torpedo tube of the station suddenly belched forth deadly 15-foot torpedoes, most of them mud torpedoes. Torpedoes loaded with high explosive in the nose, a delayed fuse, and a load of soft clinging mud in the rear. The mud would flow down over the nose and offer a resistance foothold for the explosive which empty space would not. 403 torpedoes equipped with anti-magnetic apparatus darted out. 104 passed the struggling fields. One found lodgment on a Miran ship and crushed in a metal wall, to be stopped by a bulkhead. The Chief Engineer watched his power declining. All 10 UV beams were united in one now, driving a terrible sword of energy that made the attacked ship skip for safety instantly. Yet the beams were all but useless, for the Miran reserve filled the gap, and the magnetic tornado continued. For 17 long minutes the station resisted the attack. Then the last of the strained mercury flowed into the receivers, and the vast power of the atostors was exhausted. Slowly the magnetic fields declined. The great walls of the station felt the clutching lines of force. They began to heat and to strain. A low, harsh grinding became audible over the roar of the atomic bombs. The whole structure trembled and jumped slightly. The roar of bombs ceased suddenly as the station jerked again more violently. Then it turned a bit, rolled clumsily. Abruptly it began to spin violently, more and more rapidly. It started rolling clumsily across the plateau. A rain of atomic bombs struck the unprotected metal, and the 8th breached the walls. The 20th was the last. There was no longer an IP station on Europa. "The difference," said Buck Kendall slowly, when the reports came in from scout ships in space that had witnessed the last struggle, "between an atomic generator and an atomic power store or accumulator is clearly shown. We haven't an adequate source of power." McLaurin sighed slowly and rose to his feet. "What can we do?" "Thank our lucky stars that Farragut here and I bought up all the mercury in the system and had it brought to Earth. We'll at least have a supply of materials for the atostors." "They don't seem to do much good." "They're the best we've got. All the photocells on Earth and Venus and Mercury are at present busily storing the sun's power in atostors. I have 2,000 tons of charged mercury in our banks here in the lunar bank. Much good that will do. They can just pull and pull and pull till it's all gone. A starfish isn't strong, but he can open the strongest oyster just because he can pull from now on. You may have a lot of power, but we also have those new 15-foot UV beams, and one 15-foot UV beam is worth, theoretically, 9 5-foot beams, and practically a dozen. We'll have a dozen of them, Remember, this place was designed not only to protect itself, but Earth, too." "They can still pull, can't they?" "They'll stop pulling when they get their fingers burned. In the meantime, why not use some of those IP ships to bring in a few more cargoes of charged mercury?" "They aren't good for much else, are they? I wonder if those fellows have anything more we don't know." "Oh, probably. I'm going to work on that crumbler thing. That's the first consideration now." "Why?" "So we can move a ship. As it is, even those two we built aren't any good." "Would they be anyway?" "Well, I think I might disturb those gentlemen slightly. Remember, they each have a nose beam 18 feet across. Exceedingly unpleasant customers." "Score, strangers, magnetic field, atomic bombs, atomic power, crumbler ray. Home team, UV beams." Kendall grinned. "I heard you were a pessimistic cuss when battle started." "Pessimistic, hell. I'm merely counting things up." "McClellan had all the odds on Lee back in the Civil War of the States, but Lee sent him home faster than he came." "But Lee lost in the end." "Why bring that up?" "I've got work to do." Still smiling, Kendall went to the laboratory he had built up in the lunar bank. Devin was already there, calculating. He looked unhappy. "We can't do anything as far as I can see. They're using an electric field, all right, and projecting it. I can't see how we can do that." "Neither can I," agreed Kendall. "So we can't use that weapon. I really didn't want to anyway. Like the neutron gun, which I told Commander McLaurin would be useless as a weapon. They'd be prepared for it, you can be sure. All I want to do is fight it, and make their projection useless." "Well, we have to know how they project it before we can break up the projection, don't we?" "Not at all. They're using an electric field of very high frequency, but variable frequency. As far as I can see, all we need is a similar variable electric field of a slightly different frequency to heterodyne theirs into something quite harmless." "Oh," said Devlin, "we could, couldn't we? But how are you going to do that?" "We'll have to learn, that's all." Buck Kendall started trying to learn. In the meantime, the Mirans were taking over Jupiter. There were 3 IP stations on the planet itself, but they were vastly hindered by the thick, almost ultraviolet proof atmosphere of Jupiter. Their rays were weak, and the magnetic fields of the Mirans were unaffected. Only their atomic bombs were hindered by the heavier gravity that pulled the rocks back in place faster than the bombs could throw them out. Still a few hours of work, and the IP stations on Jupiter had rolled wildly across the flat plains of the planet like dented cans, to end in utter destruction. The Mirans had paid no attention to the fleeing passenger and freighter ships that left the planet, loaded to the utmost with human cargo and absolutely no freight. The IP fleet had to go to their rescue with oxygen tanks to take care of the extra humans, but nearly 3/4 of the population of Jupiter, a newly established population, and hence a readily mobile one, was saved. The others the Mirans did not bother with, particularly, except when they happened to be near where the Mirans wanted to work. Then they were instantly destroyed by atomic bombing or gamma rays. The Mirans settled almost at once and began their work of finding on Jupiter the badly needed atomic fuels. Machines were set up and work begun. Mirans laboring under the gravity of the heavy planet. Then 50 ships swam up again, reloaded with fuel, and with crews consisting solely of uninjured warriors, and started for Mars. Mars was halfway between her near conjunction and her maximum elongation with respect to Jupiter at that time. The Mirans knew their business, though, for they started in on the IP station on Phobos. They were practiced by this time, and this IP station had only 7 5-foot beams. In half an hour that station fell. and its sister station on Deimos followed. 3 wounded ships returned to Jupiter, and 10 new ships came out. The attack on Mars itself was started. Mars was a different proposition. There were 32 IP stations here, one of them nearly as powerful as the lunar bank station. It was equipped with 4 of the huge 15-foot beams, and it had 15 tons of mercury, more than 7/8 charged. The Mars Center Station was located a short 10 miles from the Mars Center City, and under the immediate orders of the IP heads, Mars Center City had been vacated. For 2 days the Mirans hung off Mars, solidifying their position on Phobos and Deimos. Then, with 62 ships, they attacked. They had made some very astute observations, and they started on the smaller stations just beyond the range of the Mars Center Station. Naturally, near so powerful a center, these stations had never been strong. They fell rapidly, but they had been counted on by Mars Center as auxiliary supports. McLaurin had sent very definite orders to Mars Center, forbidding any action on their part save gathering of power supplies. At last a direct attack on Mars Center was launched. For the first time the Mirans saw one of the 15-foot beams. Mars' atmosphere is thin, and there is little ozone. The ultraviolet beams were nearly as effective as in empty space. When the Mirans dropped their ships, a full 30 of them, into the circle formation, Mars Center answered at once. All 4 beams started. Those 15-foot beams, connected directly to huge atostor release apparatus, delivered a maximum power of 2 3/4 billion horsepower each. The first Miran ship struck, sparkled magnificently, and a terrific cascade of white hot metal rolled down from its nose. The great ship nosed down and to the left abruptly, accelerated swiftly, and crashed with tremendous energy on the plain outside of Mars Center City. White unwavering flames licked up suddenly and made a column 500 feet high against the sky. Then the wreck exploded with a violence that left a crater half a mile across. 3 other ships had been struck and were rapidly retreating. Another try was made for the ring formation, and 4 more ships were wounded and replaced. The ring did not retreat, but the great magnetic field started. Atomic and gamma ray bombs started now, flashing sometimes dangerously close to the station as its magnetic field battled the rotating field of the ships. The 4 great beams and many smaller ones were in swift and angry action. Not more than a 10-second exposure could be endured by any one ship before it must retreat. For 5 minutes the Mirans hung doggedly at their task. Then wisely they retreated. Of the fleet, not more than 7 ships remained untouched. Mars Center Station had held, at what cost only they knew. 500 tons of their mercury had been exhausted in that brief 5 minutes. 100 tons a minute had flowed into and out of the atostor apparatus. Mars Center radioed for help when the fleet lifted. There was one other station on Mars that stood a good chance of survival. Deimos Station, with 3 of the big beams installed, and apparatus for their 4th was in the station, and being rapidly worked over. McLaurin did a wise and courageous thing, at which every man on Mars cursed. He ordered that all IP stations save these 2 be deserted, and all mercury fuel reserves be moved to Deimos and Mars Center. The Mirans could not land on the northwestern section of Mars, nor in the south central region. Therefore, Mars was not exactly habitable to Miran ships, because the great beams had been so perfectly figured that they were effective at a range of nearly 1,200 miles. Deimos Station was attacked, but it was a half-hearted attack, for Mirans were becoming distinctly skittish about 15-foot UV beams. 2 badly blistered ships and the Mirans retreated to Jupiter. But Mira held Phobos and Deimos. In 2 weeks they had set up cannon there and proved themselves accurate long-range gunners. Against the feeble attraction of Deimos, and with Mars gravity to help them, they began bombarding the 2 stations and anything that attempted to approach them with gamma and atomic explosive bombs. Meanwhile they amused themselves occasionally by planting a gamma ray bomb in each of Mars's major cities. That made Mars uninhabitable for Solarians as well as for Mirans, at least until the deadly slow action of atomic explosives wore off, or were removed. Then the Mirans, after a lapse of 3 weeks, while they dug in their toes on Jupiter, prepared to leap. Earth was the next goal. Miran scout ships had been sent out before this, and severely handled by the concentrated fleets of the IP that hung grimly off Earth and Luna now. But the scouts had learned one thing. Mirans could never hope to attain a firm grasp on Earth while terribly armed Luna hung like a sword of Damocles over their head. Further attack on Earth directly would be next to impossible, for thanks to Farragut's interplanetary company, nearly all the mercury metal in the system was safely lodged on Earth and saturated with power. Every major city had been equipped with great UV apparatus, and neutron guns in plenty waited on small ships just outside the atmosphere to explode harmlessly any atomic or gamma bombs Miran ships might attempt to deposit. An attack on Luna was the first step, but that terrible gigantic fort on Luna worried them. Yet while that fort existed, Earth ships were free to come and go, for Mirans could not afford to stand near. At a distance of 20,000 miles, small Miran ships had felt the touch of those great UV beams. Finally, a brief test attack was made. An entire fleet of 100 ships. They drew almost into position, faster than light, faster than the signal warnings could send their messages. In position, all those great ships strained and heaved at the mighty magnetic vortex that twisted at the field of the fort. Instantly 12 of the 15-foot UV beams replied, and 2 great UV beams of a size the Mirans had never seen before, beams from the 2 ships S. Doradus and Cepheid. The test attack dissolved as suddenly as it had come. The Mirans returned to Jupiter and to the outer planets, where they had further established themselves. Most of the solar system was theirs, but the Solarians still held the choicest planets, and kept the Mirans from using the mild-temperatured Mars. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of The Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. "They can't take this, at least," sighed McLaurin as they retreated from Luna. "I didn't think they could right away. I was wondering, though, if they haven't something we haven't seen yet. Besides which, give them time, give them time." "Well, give us time, too," snapped McLaurin. "How are you coming?" Buck smiled. "I'm sure I don't know. I have a machine, but I haven't the slightest idea of whether or not it's any good." "Why not?" "I can destroy, I hope, but I can't build up their ray. I can't test the machine because I haven't their ray to test it against." "What can we do to test it?" "The only thing I can see is to call for volunteers and send out a 6-man cruiser. If the ship's too small, they may not destroy it with the big crumbler rays. If it's too large and the machine didn't work, we'd lose too much." 12 hours later, the IP men at the Lunar Bank Fort were lined up. McLaurin stepped up on the platform and addressed the men briefly, told them what was needed. 6 volunteers were selected by a process of elimination. Those who were married, had dependents, officers, and others were refused. Finally, 6 men of the IP were chosen, neither rookies nor veterans, 6 average men, and one average 6-man cruiser, 111 feet long, 22 feet in diameter. It was the T-208, a sister ship of the T-247, the first ship to be destroyed. The T-208 started out from Luna with full acceleration, sped out toward Phobos. Slowly she circled the satellite, while distant scouts kept her under view. Lazily, the Miran patrol on Phobos watched the T-208, indifferent to her. The T-208 dove suddenly, after 5 fruitless circles of the tiny world, and with her 4-foot UV beam flaming, stabbed angrily at a flight of Miran scouts berthed in the very shadow of a great battlecruiser, one of the interstellar ships stationed here on Phobos. 4 of the little ships slumped in incandescence. Angrily, the terrific sword of energy slashed at the frail little scouts. Angrily, the Miran interstellar ship shot herself abruptly into action against this insolent cruiser. The cruiser launched a flight of the mercury torpedoes. Flashing, burning, ultraviolet energy flooded the great ship harmlessly, for the men were, as usual, protected. The Miran answered with the neutron beam, atomic and gamma bombs, and the crumbler ray. Gently, softly, a halo of shimmering violet luminescence built up about the T-208. The UV beam continued to flare, wavering slightly in its aim, then fell way off to one side. The T-208 staggered suddenly, wandered from her course whole but uncontrolled, for the men within the ship were dead. Majestically the Miran swung along beside the dead ship. A great magnetic tow cable shot out toward it, to shy off at first, then slowly be adjusted, and take hold in the magnetic shield of the T-208. The pilots of the watching scout ships turned away. They knew what would happen. It did. 5, 10, 20 seconds passed. Then the dead man took over the ship, and the stored power in the atostor tanks blasted in a terrible flame that shattered the metal hull to molecular fragments. The interstellar cruiser shuddered and rolled half over at the blasting pressure. Leaking seams appeared in her plates. The scouts raced back to Luna as the Miran settled heavily and a trifle clumsily to Phobos. Miran radio beams were forcing their way out toward the Miran station on Europa, to be relayed to the headquarters on Jupiter, just as Solarian radio beams were thrusting through space toward Luna. Said the Miran messages, "Their ship no longer crumbles." Said the Solarian message, "The ships no longer crumble, but the men die." His deep eyes burning tensely, Buck Kendall heard the message coming in, and rose slowly from his seat to pace the floor. "I think I know why," he said at last. "I should have thought. For that too can be prevented." "Why, what in the name of the planets?" asked McLaurin. "It didn't kill the men in the forts. Why does it kill the men in the ships when the ships are protected?" "The protection kills them." "But they had the protective oscillations on all the way out," protested the commander. "Think how it works, though. Think, man. The enemy's field is an electric field oscillation. We combat it by setting up a similar oscillating field in the metal of the hull ourselves. Because the metal conducts the strains, they meet and oppose. It's not a shield. A shield is impossible, as I have said, because of energy concentration factors. If their beam carried 100,000 horsepower in a 10-foot square beam, in every 10 square feet of our shield we'd have to have 100,000 horsepower. In other words, hundreds of times as much energy would be needed in the shield as they used in their beam. We can't afford that. We had to let the beams oppose our oscillations in the metal, where, because the metal conducts, they meet on an equal basis. But when two oscillations of slightly different frequency meet, what is the result? In this case, a heterodyne frequency of a lower and harmless frequency." "So I thought." I was partly right. It does not harm the metal, but it kills the men. It is supersonic. The terrible shrill sounds destroy the cells of the men's bodies. Then, when their dead hands release the controls, the automatic switches blow up the ship. God, we stop one menace, and it's like the Hydra. For every head we lop off, two spring up. Ah, but they are lesser heads. Look, what is the fundamental difference between sound and light? One is a vibration of matter, and the other... Ah, eliminate the material contact. Exactly. All we need to do is to let the ships operate airless, the men in spacesuits. Then the air cannot carry the sounds to them. And by putting special dampening materials in their suits, we can stop the vibrations that would reach them through their feet and hands. Another 6-man ship must go out, but this ship will come back. And with the order for another experimental ship went the orders for commercial supplies of this new apparatus. Every IP ship must be equipped to resist it. Buck Kendall sailed on the 6-man scout that went out this time. Again they swooped once at Phobos. Again Miran scout ships crumbled under the attack of the vicious UV beams. The Mirans were not waiting contemptuously this time. In an instant the great interstellar ship rose from its berth, its weapons working angrily. The crumbler ray snapped out at the T-253. Kendall stared into the periscope visor intently. Clumsily his padded hands worked at the specially adapted controls. The soft hiss of the oxygen released into his suit disturbed him slightly. The radio phones in his helmet carried all the conversations in the ship to him with equal clarity. He watched as the great ship angled angrily up. His vision was momentarily obscured by a violet glow that built up and reached out gently from every point of metal in the ship. The instant Kendall saw that, the 253 was fleeing under his hands. The test had been made. Now all he desired was safety again. The ion rockets flared recklessly as, crushed under an acceleration of 4 Earth gravities, he sank heavily into his seat. Grimly the Miran ship was pursuing them, easily keeping up with the fleeing midget. The crumbler beam became more intense, the violet glow more vivid. The UV beam was reaching out directly behind now. With a cry of agony, Kendall ripped the radiophone connection out of his suit. A soft hiss of leaking air warned him of too great violence only minutes later, for his ears had been deafened by the sudden shriek of a tremendous signal from outside. Instantly Kendall knew what that meant, and he could not communicate with his men. There was no metal in these special suits. Even the oxygen tanks were made of a synthetic plastic of tremendous strength. No scrap of vibrating metal was permissible. The padded gloves and boots protected him, but there was a new and different type of crackle and haze from the metal points now. It was almost invisible in the practically airless ship, but Kendall saw it. Presently he felt it, as he desperately increased his acceleration. Slow creeping heat was attacking him. The heat was increasing rapidly now. Desperately he was working at the crumbler protection controls, but immediately set them back as they were. He had to have the crumbler protection as well. Grimly the great Miran ship hung right beside them. Angrily the 2 4-foot UV beams flashed back, seeking some weak spot. There were none. At her absolute maximum of acceleration, the little ship plunged on. Gamma and atomic bombs were washing in her flame. The heavy blocks of paraffin between her walls were long since melted, retained only by the presence of the metal walls. Smoke was beginning to filter out now, and Kendall recognized a new and deadlier menace. Heat, quantities of heat, were being poured into the little ship, and the neutron guns were doing their best to add to it. The paraffin was confined in there, and like any substance, it could be volatilized, and as a vapor, develop pressure, explosive pressure. The Mirran seemed satisfied in his tactics so far, and changed them. 47 million miles from Earth, the Mirans simply accelerated a bit more and crowded the Solarian ship a bit. White-faced Buck Kendall was forced to turn a bit aside. The Miran turned also. Kendall turned a bit more. Flashing across his range of vision at an incredible speed, a tiny thing, no more than 20 feet long and 5 in diameter, a scout ship, appeared. Its tiny nose ultraviolet beam was blasting a solid cylinder of violet incandescence a foot across in the hull of the Miran, and to the Miran, angling swiftly across his range of vision. Its magnetic field clashed for a thousandth of a second with the T-253, instantly meeting and absorbing the fringing edges. Then it swept through the Miran's magnetic shield as easily. The delicate instruments of the scout instantaneously adjusted its own magnetic field as much as possible. There was resistance, enormous resistance. The ship crumbled in on itself. The tail vanished in dust as a sweeping crumbler beam caught it at last, and the remaining portion of the ship plowed into the nose of the Miran. The Miran's force control room was wrecked. For perhaps a minute and a half the ship was without control. Then the control was reestablished, and in vain the telescopes and instruments searched for the T-253. Lightless, her rockets out now, her fields damped down to extinction, the T-253 was lost in the pulsing, gyrating fields of a half a dozen scout ships. Kendall looked grimly at the crushed spot on the nose of the Miran. His ship was drifting slowly away from the greater ship. Presently, however, the Miran put on speed in the direction of Earth, and the T-253 fell far behind. The Miran was not seriously injured, but that scout pilot, in sacrificing life, had thrown dust in their eyes for just those few moments Kendall had needed to lose a lightless ship in lightless space. Lightless for the Mirans at any rate. The IP ship had been covered with a black paint, and in no time at all Kendall had gotten his ship into a position where the energy radiations of the sun made him undetectable from the Miran position, since the radiation of his own ship, even in the heat range, was mingled with the direct radiation of the sun. The sun was in the Miran's eyes, both actual and instrumental. An hour later the Miran returned, past the still lightless ship at a distance of 5 million miles, and settled to Phobos for the slight repairs needed. 12 hours later the T-253 settled to Luna for the many rearrangements she would need. "I rather knew it was coming," Kendall admitted sadly, "but danged if I didn't forget all about it. And cost the life of one of the finest men in the system. Jensen's family get a permanent pension, just twice his salary, McLaurin. In the meantime—" "What was it? Pure heat? But how?" "Pure radio. Nothing but short-wave radio directed at us. They probably had the apparatus, knew how to make it, but that's not a good type of heat ray, because the radio tube is generally less than 80% efficient, which is a whale of a loss when you're working in a battle, and a whale of an inconvenience. We were heated only 4 times as much as the Miran. He had to pump that heat into a heat reservoir, a water tank probably, to protect himself. Highly inefficient and ineffective against a large ship. Also, he had to hold his beam on us nearly 10 minutes before it would have become unbearable. He was again trying to kill the men and not the ship. The men are the weakest point, obviously." "Can you overcome that?" "Obviously, no. The thing works on pure energy. I'd have to match his energy to neutralize it. You knew it's an old proposition that if you could take a beam of pure monochromatic light and divide it exactly in half and then recombine it in perfect interference, you'd have annihilation of energy, cancellation to extinction. The trouble is, you never do get that. You can't get monochromatic light because light can't be monochromatic. That's due to the Heisenberg uncertainty, my pet bugbear. The atom that radiates the light must be moving. If it isn't, the emission of the light itself gives it a kick that moves it. Now, no matter what the quantum might have been, it loses energy in kicking the atom. That changes the situation instantly, and incidentally the color of the light. Then, since all the radiating atoms won't be moving alike, etc., the mass of light can't be monochromatic. Therefore, perfect interference is impossible. The way that relates to the problem in hand is that we can't possibly destroy his energy. We can, as we do in the crumbler stunt, change it. He can't, I suspect, put too much power behind his crumbler, or he'd have crumbling going on at home. We get a slight heating from it anyway. Into the bargain, his radio was after us, and his neutrons naturally carried energy. Now, no matter what we do, we've got that to handle. When we fight his crumbler, we actually add heat energy to it, ourselves, and make the heating effect just twice as bad. If we try to heterodyne his radio, presto, it has twice the heat energy anyway, though we might reduce it to a frequency that penetrated the ship instead of all staying in it. But by the proposition, we have to use as much energy, and in fact, remember the 80% rule. We've got to take it and like it. But, objected McLaurin, we don't like it. Then build ships as big as his, and he'll quit trying to roast you, particularly if the inner walls are synthetic plastics. Did you know that I used them in the S. Doradus and Cephide? Yes. Were you thinking of that? No, just luck, and the fact that they're light, strong as steel almost, and can be manufactured in forms much more quickly. Only the outer hull is tungsten beryllium. The advantage in this will be that nearly all the energy will be absorbed outside and will radiate pretty fast, particularly as that tungsten beryllium has a high radiation factor in the long heat range. What does that mean? Well, ordinary polished silver is a mighty poor radiator. Homely example. Try waiting for your coffee to cool if it's in a polished silver pot. Then try it in a tungsten beryllium pot. No matter how you polish that tungsten beryllium, the stuff will radiate heat. That's why an IP ship is always so blamed cold. You know the passenger ships use polished aluminum outer walls. The big help is that the tungsten beryllium will throw off the energy pretty fast, and in a big ship with a whale of a lot of matter to heat, the strangers will simply give up the idea. Yes, but only 2 ships in the system compare with them in size. Sorry, but I didn't build the IP fleet, and there are lots of tungsten and beryllium on Earth. Enough, anyway. Will they use that beam on the fort, and can't we use that thing on them? They won't, and we won't, though we could. A bank of those new 1,000,000-watt tubes, perhaps 100 of them, and we'd have a pretty effective heater, but an awful waste of power. I've got something better. New? Somewhat. I found out how to make the mirror field in a plate of metal instead of a block. Come on to the lab and I'll show you. What's the advantage? Oh, weight saved, and silver metal saved. A lot more than that, Mac. Watch. At the laboratory, the new apparatus looked immensely lighter and simpler than the old. The atostor, the ionizer, and the twin ion projectors were as before, great rigid metal structures that would maintain the meeting point of the ions with inflexible exactitude under any acceleration strains. But now, instead of the heavy silver block in which a mirror was figured, the mirror consisted of a polished silver plate, parabolic to be sure, but little more than a half-inch in thickness. It was mounted in a framework of complex stout metal braces. Kendall started the ion flame at low intensity, so the UV beam was little more than a spotlight. You missed the point, Mac. Now watch the tungsten beryllium plate. I'll hold the power steady. It's an 18-inch beam, and now the energy is just sufficient to heat that tungsten plate to bright red, but... Kendall turned over a small rheostat control, and abruptly the 18-inch diameter spot on the tungsten beryllium plate began contracting. It contracted till it was a blazing, sparkling spot of molten incandescence less than an inch across. That's the advantage of focus. At this distance of a few hundred feet, with a small beam I can do that. With a 20-foot beam I can get a 2-foot spot at a distance of nearly 10 miles. That means that the receiving end will have the pleasure of handling 100 times the energy concentration. That would punch a hole through most anything. All you have to do is focus it. The trouble being, if it's out of focus, the advantage is more than lost. So if there's any question about getting the focus, we'll get along without it. A real help if you do. That would punch a hole before the stranger ship could turn away as they do now. Kendall nodded. That's what I was after. It's mainly for the forts, though. We'll have to signal the dope to the Mars Center and Dinmore stations. They can fix it up themselves. In the meantime, all we can do is hold on and hunt. And let's hope better than the strangers do. End of chapter 9. Of the Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Sadly, the convalescent Gresth Gkae listened to the reports of his lieutenants. More and more disgraced he felt as he realized how badly he had blundered in reporting the people of this system unable to cope with the attackers' weapons. Gresth Gkae looked up at his old friend and physician, Mirth Scall. He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid, Mirth Scall, I'm afraid. We have perhaps made a mistake. The better and the stronger alone should rule. Aye, but is the stronger always the better? I'm afraid we have mistaken the truth in assuming this. If we have, then may Jarth, Lord of Truth and Wisdom, punish us. Mighty Jarth, if I have mistaken in following my judgment, it is not from disobedience. It is lack of thy knowledge. The strongest, they are not always the better, are they?" Mirth Scall bent sharply over his friend. "Quiet thyself, Gresth Gkae. You know and I know you have done only your best, and surely Jarth himself can ask no better of anyone. You must rest, for only by rest can those terrible burns be healed. All your steen, over half the body area, was burned off. You have been delirious for many days." "But Mirth Scall, think. Have we disobeyed Jarth's will? It is, we know, his will that only the best and strongest shall rule. But are the best always the strongest? An imbecile adult could destroy the life of a genius-grade child. The strongest wins, but not the best. Such would not be the will of Jarth. If we be the stronger and the best, then it is right and just that these strange creatures should be destroyed, that we may have a stable world of stable light and heat. But look and see with what terrible swiftness these strange creatures have learned. May it not be they are the better race, that it is we who are the weaker and the poorer? Can it be that Jarth has brought us together that these people might learn and destroy us? If they be the stronger and the better, then may Jarth's will be done. But we must test our strength to the utmost. I must rise and go to my laboratory soon. They have it set up?" "Aye, they have, Gresth Gkae. But remember, the weak and the sick make faults the strong and well do not. Better that you rest yourself. There is little you can do while your body seeks to recover from these terrible burns." "You are wrong, my friend, wrong. Don't you see that my mind is clear, that it is the mind which must fight in these battles, for surely the man is weak against such things as this infra-X radiation. Why, I am better able to fight now than are you, for I am a trained fighter of the mind, while you are a trained healer of the body. These strange beings, with their stiff arms and legs, their tender skins, and their swift minds, have fought us all too well. If we must test, let it be a test. I have heard how they so quickly solve the riddle of the crumbling field. That took us longer, and we designed it. The Council of Worlds put me in command. Let me up, Skahl. I must work." Concerned, the physician looked down at him. Finally he spoke again. "No, I will not permit you to leave the hospital ship. You must stay here, but if, as you have said, the mind is what must fight, then surely you can fight well from here, for your mind is here." "No, I cannot, and you well know it. I may shorten my life, but what matter? Death is the end toward which the chemical reaction life tends," quoted the scientist. "You know I have left my children. My immortality is assured through them. I can afford to die in peace, if it assures their welfare. Time is precious, and while my mind might work from here, it must have data on which to work. For that, I must go to the laboratories. Help me, Mirth Skahl." Reluctantly the physician granted the request, but begged of Gresth Gkae a promise of at least 6 hours rest in every 15, and a good sleep of at least 27 hours every night. Gresth Gkae agreed, and from a wheelchair conducted his work, began a new line of experimentation he hoped would yield them the weapon they needed. Under him the staff of scientists worked, aiding and advising and suggesting. The apparatus was built, tested, and found wanting. Time and again as the days passed, they watched Gresth Gkae gaining strength very, very slowly, taken away despondent at the end of his 40 hours of work. A dozen expeditions were sent to Jupiter's poles to watch and measure and study the tremendous auroral displays there, where Jupiter's vast magnetic field sucked in countless quintillions of the flying electrons from the sun, and brought them circling in a vast, magnificent display of auroral ionization. Expeditions went to the great southern plateau, the plateau of storms, where the titanic air currents resulted in an everlasting display of terrific lightnings, great burning balls of electric force floating dangerous and deadly across the frozen, ultra-cold plain. And the expeditions brought back data. Yet still Gresth Gkae could not sleep, his thoughts intruding constantly. Hours Mirth Skahl spent with him, calming him to sleep. "But what is this constant search? It is little enough I know of science, but why do you send our men to these spots of wonderfully beautiful but useless natural forces? Can we somehow, do you think, turn them against the people of these worlds?" Softly the old Miran smiled. "Yes, you might say so. For look, it is the strange balls of electric force I want to know about. Stor had few, but occasionally we saw them. Never were they properly investigated. I want to know their secret, for I am sure they are balls of electric force, not vastly dissimilar from the nucleus of the atom. Always we have known that no system of pure electrical forces could remain stable, yet these strange balls of energy do. How is it? I'm sure it will be of vast importance. But the direct secret I hope to learn is this: what can be done with electric fields can nearly always be duplicated or paralleled in magnetic fields. If I can learn how to make these electric balls of energy, can I not hope to make similar magnetic balls of energy? Yes, I see that would seem true, but what benefit would you derive from that? You have magnetic beams now, and yet they are useless because you can get nowhere near the forts. How then would these benefit you? We can do nothing to the forts because of that magnetic shield. Could we once break it down, then the fort is helpless, and 1 or 2 small atomic bombs destroy it. But we cannot stay near, for the terrible infra X-rays of theirs burns holes in our ship and in our men. But look you, I can drop many atomic bombs from a distance where their beams are ineffective. Suppose I do make a magnetic ball of energy, a magnetic bomb. Then I can drop it from a distance. We have learned that the power supply of these forts is very great, but not endless, as is ours now, thanks to the vast supplies of power metal on this heavy planet. Then all we need to do is stay at a distance where they cannot reach us, and drop magnetic bombs. Ah, they will be stopped and their energy absorbed, but we can keep it up day after day and slowly drain out their power. Then our atomic bombs can destroy those forts, and we can move on." But suddenly the animation and strength left his voice. He turned a sad, downcast face to his friend. "But Mirth Skull, we can't do it," he complained. "Ah, now I can see why you so want to continue this wearing and worrying work. You need time, Gresth Gkae, only time for success. Tomorrow it may be that you will see the first hint that will lead you to success." "Ah, I only hope it, Mirth Skull, I only hope it." But it was the next day that they saw the first glimpse of the secret, and saw the path that might lead to hope and success. In a week they were sending electric bombs across the laboratory, and in 3 days more a magnetic bomb streaked dully across the laboratory to a magnetic shield they had set up and buried itself in it, to explode in brilliant light and heat. From that day Gresth Gkae began to mend. In the 3 weeks that were needed to build the apparatus in the ships, he regained strength, so that when the first flight of 5 interstellar ships rose from Jupiter, he was on the flagship. To Phobos they went first, to the little inner satellites of Mars, scarcely 8 miles in diameter, a tiny bit of broken metal and rock, utterly airless, but scarcely more than 3,700 miles from the surface of Mars below. The Mars Center and Deanmore forts were wasting no power raying a ship at that distance. They could, of course, have damaged it, but not severely enough to make up for the loss of their strictly limited power. The photocells had been working overtime. Every minute of available light had been used, and still scarcely 2,100 tons of charged mercury remained in the tanks of Mars Center and 1,950 in the tanks at Deanmore. The flight of 5 ships settled comfortably upon Phobos, while the 3 relieved of duty started back to Jupiter. Immediately work was begun on the attack. The ships were first landed on the near side, while the apparatus of the projectors was unloaded. Then the great ships moved around to the far side. Phobos, of course, rotated, with one face fixed irrevocably toward Mars itself, the other always to the cold of space. Great power leads trailed beneath the ships and to the dark side. Then there were huge water lines for cooling. On this almost weightless world, where the great ships weighed hundreds of thousands of tons on a planet weighed so little they were frequently moved about by a single man, the laying of 5 miles of water conduit was no impossibility. Then they were ready. Mars Center came first. Automatic devices kept the aim exact as the first of the magnetic bombs started down. At 5-second intervals they were projected outward, invisible globes of concentrated magnetic energy, undetectable in space. 7 seconds passed before the first became dimly visible in the thin air of Mars. It floated down. It would miss the fort, it seemed, so far to one side. Abruptly it turned, and darted with tremendously accelerating speed for the great magnetic field of the fort. With a vast blast of light it exploded. 5 seconds later a second exploded, and a third. Mars Center signaled scoffingly that the bombs were all being stopped dead in the magnetic atmosphere, after the bombardment had been witnessed from Earth and Luna. An hour later they gave a report that they were concentrated magnetic fields of energy that would be rather dangerous if it weren't that they couldn't even stand in the magnetic atmosphere. 3 hours later Mars Center reported that they contained considerably more energy than had at first been thought. Further, which they had not carefully considered at first, they were taking energy with them. They were taking away about an equal amount of energy as each blew up. It was only a half hour after that the men of Mars Center realized perfectly what it meant. Their power was being drained just a little bit better than twice as fast as they generated during the day. And since Phobos spun so swiftly across the sky, Deenmor got the attack just about the time Mars Center was released. Deenmor immediately began seeking for the source of it. Somewhere on Phobos, but where? The Mirans were experts at camouflage. Deenmor Station, realizing the menace, immediately rayed the projector. They tore up a great deal of harmless rock with their huge UV rays, but the bomb device continued to throw one bomb each 5 seconds. When Deenmor operated from Phobos' position, Mars Center was exposed to the deadly constant drain. A day or two later, the bombs were coming, one each second and a half, for more ships had joined in the work on Phobos. Gresth Gkae saw the work was going nicely. He knew that now it was only a question of time before those magnetic shields would fail, and then the whole fort would be powerless. Maybe it might be a good idea, when the forts were powerless, to investigate instead of blowing them up. There might be interesting and worthwhile pieces of apparatus, particularly the UV beams apparatus. End of chapter 10. Of the Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Buck Kendall entered the communications room rather furtively. He hated the place. Cole was there, and McLaurin. Mac was looking tired and drawn. Cole not so tired, but equally drawn. The signals were coming through fairly well, because most of the disturbance was rising where the signals rose, and all the disturbance, practically, was magnetic rather than electric. "Deenmor is sending, Buck," McLaurin said as he entered. "They're down to the last 55 tons. They'll have more time now, a rest while Phobos sinks. Mars Center has another 250 tons, but it's just a question of time. Have you any hope to offer?" "No," said Kendall in a strained voice. "But, Mac, I don't think men like those are afraid to die. It's dying uselessly they fear. Tell 'em they've defended not alone Mars, but all the system, in holding up the strangers on Mars. We here on Luna have been safer because of them. And Mac, tell them that in the meantime, while they defended us and gave us time to work, we have begun to see the trail that will lead to victory." "You have?" gasped McLaurin. "No, but they will never know." Kendall left hastily. He went and stood moodily looking at the calculator machines. The calculator machines that refused to give the answers he sought. No matter how he might modify that original idea of his, no matter what different line of attack he might try in solving the problems of space and matter, while he used the system he knew was right, the answer came down to that deadly, hope-blasting expression that meant only uncertain. Even Buck was beginning to feel uncertain under that constant crushing of hope. Uncertainty was eating into him and destroying. From the communications room came the hum and drive of the great sender, flashing its message across 72 million miles of nothing. "Buck Kendall says he has learned something that will lead to victory while you held back the—" Kendall switched on a noisy, humming fan viciously. The two intelligible signals were drowned in its sound. "And tell them to destroy the apparatus before the last of the power is gone," McLaurin ordered softly. The men in Deenmor Station did slightly better than that. Gradually they cut down their magnetic shield, and some of the magnetic bombs tore and twisted viciously at the heavy metal walls. The thin atmosphere of Mars leaked in. Grimly the men waited. Atomic bombs or ships to investigate? It did not matter much to them personally. Gresth Gkae smiled with his old vigor as he ordered one of the great interstellar ships to land beside the powerless station, approaching from such an angle that the still active Mars Center station could not attack. One of the fleet of Phobos rose and circled about the planet and settled gracefully beside the station. For half an hour it lay there quietly, waiting and watching. Then a crew of 24 Mirans started across the dry, crumbly powder of Mars' sand, toward the fort. Simultaneously, almost, three things happened. A 3-foot UV beam wiped out the advancing party. A pair of 15-foot beams cut a great gaping hole in the wall of the interstellar ship as it darted up, like a startled quail, its weapons roaring defiance, only to fall back, severely wounded. And the radio messages pounded out to Earth the first description of the Miran people. Methodically, the men in Deenmor Station used all but 1 ton of their power to completely and forever wreck and destroy the interstellar cripple that floundered for a few moments on the sands a bare mile away. Presently, before Deenmor was through with it, the atomic bombs stopped coming, and the atomic shells. The magnetic shield that had been reestablished for the few minutes of this last dying sting fell. Deenmor Station vanished in a sudden, colossal tongue of blue-green light as the ton of automatically distorted mercury was exploded by a projector beam turned on the tank. It was long gone when the first atomic bombs and magnetic bombs dropped from Phobos reached the spot, and only hot rock and broken metal remained. Mars Center failed, in fact, the next time Phobos rode high over it. The apparatus here had been carefully destroyed by technicians with the view of making it indecipherable, but the Mirans made it even more certain, for no ship settled here to investigate, but a stream of atomic bombs that lasted for over an hour and churned the rock to dust and the dust to molten lava, in which pools of fused tungsten beryllium alloy bubbled slowly and sank. "Ah, Jarth, they are a brave race, whatever we may say of their queer shape," sighed Gresth Gkae, as the last of Mars Center sank in bubbling lava. They stung as they died. For some minutes he was silent. "We must move on," he said at length. "I have been thinking, and it seems best that a few ships land here and establish a fort, while some 20 move on to the satellite of the third planet and destroy the fort there. We cannot operate against the planet while that hangs above us." 7 ships settled on Mars, while the fleet came up from Jupiter to join with Gresth Gkae's flight of ships on its way to Luna. An automatically controlled ship was sent ahead and began the bombardment. It approached slowly and was not destroyed by the UV beams till it had come to within 40,000 miles of the fort. At 60,000, Gresth Gkae stationed his fleet and returned to 150,000 immediately as the titanic UV beams of the lunar fort stretched out to their maximum range. The focus made a difference. One ship started limping back to Jupiter in tow of a second, while the rest began the slow, methodical work of wearing down the defenses of the lunar fort. Kendall looked out at the magnificent display of clashing, warring energies, the great whirling spears and disks of opalescent flame, and turned away sadly. The men at Deenmor must have watched that for days, and at Mars Center. "How long can we hold out?" asked McLaurin. 3 weeks or so at the present rate. That's a long time, really, and we can escape if we want to. The UV beams here have a greater range than any weapons the Strangers have, and with Earth so near, oh, we could escape. Little good." "What are you going to do?" "I," said Buck Kendall, suddenly savage, "am going to consign all the math machines in the universe to eternal damnation, and go ahead and build a machine anyway. I know that thing ought to be right. The math's wrong." "There's no other thing to try?" "A billion others. I don't know how many others. We ought to get atomic energy somehow, but that thing infuriates me. 100 things that math has predicted that I have checked by experiment, simple little things, but when I carry it through to the point where I can get something useful, it wriggles off into uncertainty." Kendall stalked off to the laboratory. Devin was there working over the calculus machines, and Kendall called him angrily. Then, more apologetic, he explained it was anger at himself. "Devin, I'm going to make that thing if it blows up and kills me. I'm going to make that thing if this whole fort blows up and kills me. The math has blown up in my face for 4 solid months, and half killed me, so I'm going to kill it. Come on, we'll make that damn junk." Angrily, furiously, Kendall drove his helpers to the task. He had worked out the apparatus in a plan a dozen times, and now he had the plans turned into patterns, the patterns into metal. Saucily, the S Doradus made the trip to and from Earth with patterns and with metal, with supplies and with apparatus. But she had to dodge and fight every inch of the way as the Miran ships swooped down angrily at her. A fighting craft could get through when the Miran fleet was withdrawn to some distance, but the Mirans were careful that no heavily loaded freighter bearing power supply should get through. And Gresth Gkae waited off Luna in his great ship, and watched the steady streams of magnetic bombs exploding on the magnetic shield of the lunar fort. Presently more ships came up and added their power to the attack, for here the photocell banks could gather tremendous energy, and Gresth Gkae knew he would need to overcome this and drain the accumulated power. Gresth Gkae felt certain if he could once crack this nut, break down Earth, he would have the system. This was the home planet. If this fell, then the two others would follow easily, despite the fact that the few forts on the innermost planet, Mercury, could gather energy from the sun at a rate greater than their ships could generate. It took Kendall 2 weeks and 3 days to set up his preliminary apparatus. They had power for perhaps 4 days more, thanks to the fact that the long lunar day had begun shortly after Gresth Gkae's impatient attack had started. Also, the S Doradus had brought in several hundred tons of charged mercury on each trip. Though this was no great quantity individually, it had mounted up in the 10 trips she had made. The Cepheid, her sister ship, had gone along on 7 of the trips and added to the total. But at length the apparatus was set up. It was peculiar looking, and it employed a great deal of power, nearly as much as a UV beam, in fact. McLaurin looked at it skeptically toward the last, and asked Buck, "What do you expect it to do?" "I am," said Kendall sourly, "uncertain. The result will be uncertainty itself." Which, considering things, was a surprisingly accurate statement. Kendall gave the exact answer. He meant to give an ironic comment, for the mathematics had been perfectly correct, only Buck Kendall misinterpreted the answer. "I followed the math with mechanisms all the way through," he explained, "and I'm putting power into it. That's all I know. Somewhere, by the laws of cause and effect, this power must show itself again, despite what the damn math says." And in that, of course, Kendall was wrong, because the laws of cause and effect didn't hold in what he was doing now. "Do you want to watch?" he asked at length. "I'm all set to try it." "I suppose I may as well," McLaurin smiled. "In our close-knit little community the fate of one is of interest to all. If it's going to blow up, I might as well be here, and if it isn't, I want to be here." Kendall smiled appreciatively and replied, "Let it be on thy own head. Here she goes." He walked over to the power board and took command. Devin and a squad of other scientists were seated about the room with every conceivable type and combination of apparatus. Kendall wanted to see what this was doing. "Tubes," he called. "Circuits A and D, tie-ins." He stopped. "The preliminary switch is in. Main circuit coming." With a jerk he threw over the last contact. A heavy relay thudded solidly. The hum of straining a toaster. Then an electric motor, humming smoothly, stopped with a jerk. "This," it remarked in a deep throaty voice, "is probably the last stand of humanity." The galvanometer before which Devin was seated apparently agreed. In a rather high-pitched voice it pointed out that, if the lunar fort falls, the Earth... It stopped abruptly, and an electroscope beside Douglas took up the thread in a high, shrill voice, rather slurred, "will be directly attacked." "This," resumed the motor in a hoarse voice, "will certainly mean the end of humanity." The motor gave up the discourse and hummed violently into action, in reverse. "My God!" Kendall pulled the switch open with a sagging jaw and staring eyes. The men in the room burst into sudden, startled exclamations. Kendall didn't give them time. His jaws snapped shut and a blazing light of wondrous joy shone in his eyes. He instantly threw the switch in again. Again the humming atostor, the strain. Slowly Devin lifted from his seat. With thrashing arms and startled, staring eyes, he drifted gently across the room. Abruptly he fell to the floor, unhurt by the light lunar gravity. "I advise," said the motor in its grumbling voice, "an immediate exodus." It stopped speaking and practiced what it preached. It was a 50-horse motor generator on a 5-ton tungsten beryllium base. But it arose abruptly, spun rapidly about an axis at right angles to the axis of its armature, and stopped as suddenly. In mid-air it continued its interrupted lecture. "Mercury, therefore, is the destination I would advise. Their power is sufficient for all machines." Gently it inverted itself and settled to the middle of the floor. Kendall instantly cut the switch. The relay did not chunk open. It refused to obey. Settled in the middle of the floor now, torn loose from its power leads, the motor generator began turning. It turned faster and faster. It was shrilling in a thin scream of terrific speed, a speed that should have torn its windings to fragments under the lash of centrifugal force. Contentedly it said throatily, "Settled." The galvanometer spoke again in its peculiar harsh voice. "Therefore, move." Abruptly, without apparent reason, the stubborn relay clicked open. The shrilly screaming motor stopped dead instantly, as though it had had no real momentum or had been inertialess. Startled, white-faced men looked at Kendall. Buck's eyes were shining with an unholy glee. "Uncertainty!" he shouted. "Uncertainty! Uncertainty! Uncertainty! You fools, don't you see it? All the math, it said uncertainty. Man, we've got just that. Uncertainty." "You're crazy," gasped McLaurin. "I'm crazy. Everything's gone crazy." Kendall roared with a sudden joyous laughter. "Absolutely. Everything goes crazy. The laws of nature break down. Heisenberg's principle showed that the law of cause and effect weren't absolute. We made them absolutely uncertain." But motors talking, instruments giving lectures?" "Certainly, or rather uncertainly. Anything, absolutely anything. The destruction of the laws of gravity, freedom from inertia, why, merely picking up a radio lecture is nothing." Suddenly, abruptly, 1,000 questions poured in on him. Jubilantly he answered what he could, told what he thought, and then brought order. "The battle's still on, men, and we've got to find out how to use this. Now we've got it. I have an idea that there's a lot more. I know what I'll get this time. Now help me remake this apparatus so we don't broadcast the thing." At once, 10 times the former pace, work was done. On the radio, news was sent out that Kendall was on the right track after all. In 2 hours the apparatus had been vastly altered. It was in the final stage, and an entirely different sort of field set up. Again they watched as Buck applied the power. The atostor hummed, but no strange tricks of matter happened this time. The more concentrated, altered field was, as Buck was to find out later, uncertainty of the 2nd degree. It was molecular uncertainty, in a field a 1.5 feet in diameter. Buck saw the thing created, and suddenly a brilliant green-blue flame shot up, and a great dark cloud of terrible red-brown, deadly vapor. Then, an instant later, Kendall had opened the relay. Gasping, the men ran from the laboratory, shutting the deadly fumes in. "N2O4," gasped Norton, the chemist, as they reached safety. "It's exothermic, but it's formed there." And in that instant Kendall grasped the meaning the choking fumes carried. "Molecular uncertainty," he decided. "We're going back. We're getting there." He altered the apparatus again, added another atostor in series, reduced the size of his sphere of forces of strange chaos of uncertainty. Within little was certain. Without, the laws of nature applied as ever. Again the apparatus was started, cautiously this time. Only a strange jumbled ionization appeared this time. Then a slow rising blue flame began to creep up and burn hot and blue. Buck looked at it for a moment. Then his face grew tense and thoughtful. "Devin, give me $50." Blankly, Devin reached into his pocket and handed over the metal disc. Cautiously, Buck Kendall tossed it toward the sphere of force. Instantly there was a flash of flame, soundless and soft colored. Then the silver disc was outlined in light, and swiftly, inevitably crumbling into dust so fine only a blue haze appeared. In less than 2 seconds the metal was gone. Only the dense blue fog remained. Then this began to go, and the leaping blue flame grew taller and stronger. "We're on the track. I'm going to stop here and calculate. Bring the data." Kendall shut off the machine and went into the calculation room. Swiftly he selected already prepared graphs of the math he had worked on. Devin came soon, and others. They assembled the data and, with tables and arithmetical machines, turned it into graphs. Then all these graphs were fed into the machine. There were curves and sine curves, abruptly breaking lines, but the answer that came when all were compounded was a perfect diagram of a flight of 4 steps, descending in unequal treads to 0. Kendall looked at it for long minutes. "That," he said at length, "is what I expected. There are 4 degrees of uncertainty. We generated uncertainty of the 1st degree, mass uncertainty, when we started. That, as here shown, takes little energy concentration. Then we increased the energy concentration and got uncertainty of the 2nd degree, molecular uncertainty. Then I added more power and reduced the field and got uncertainty of the 3rd degree, atomic uncertainty. There is uncertainty of the 4th degree. It is barely attainable with our toasters. It is utter uncertainty. In the 1st degree the laws of mass action fail, the great broad reaching laws. In the 2nd degree the laws of the molecules, a finer organization, break down, and anything can happen in chemistry. In the 3rd degree the laws of atomic physics break down slowly. The atom is tough, it is very compact, and we just barely attain the concentration needed with that apparatus. But in the 3rd degree, when the atomic laws break down into utter uncertainty, the atoms break, and only hydrogen can exist. That was the blue flame. But the 4th degree, there is no law whatsoever. Nothing in all the universe can exist. It means the utter destruction and release of the energy of matter. Kendall paused for a moment. "We have won with this. We need only make up this apparatus, and maybe make it into a weapon. You know, in the 4th degree, nothing in all the universe could resist, deflect, or control it, if launched freely and self-maintaining. I think that might be done. You see, no laws affect it, for it breaks down the law. Magnetism cannot attract or repel it because magnetic fields cannot exist. There is no law of magnetic force where this field is. And you know, Devin, how I have analyzed and duplicated their magnetic ball fields. This should be capable of formation into a ball field. We need only make it up now. We will install it in the S Doradus and the Cepheid as a weapon. We need only install it as an energy source here. Let us start." End of chapter 11. The Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Buck Kendall, with a slow smile, looked out of the port in the thick metal wall. The magnetic shield of the lunar fort was washed constantly with the fires of exploding magnetic bombs. The smile spread broader. "My friends," he said softly, "you can pull from now till doomsday as far as I'm concerned, and you won't even disturb us now." He looked back over his shoulder into the power room. A hunched bulk, beautifully designed and carefully finished, the apparatus that created uncertainty of the 4th degree, was destroying matter and creating by its destruction terrific electric fields. These fields were feeding the magnetic shields now. Under the present drain, the machine was not noticeably working. In fact, Kendall was a bit annoyed. He had tested out the energy generating properties of this machine, trying to find a limit. He had found that there was no limit. The great copper conductors, charged with the same atostor force that was used in the mercury fuel, were perfect conductors. They had not heated. But the 11,000 tons of discharged mercury metal had been completely charged in just a bit better than 11 minutes. The pumps wouldn't force it through the charging apparatus any faster than that. 2 weeks more had passed while the S Doradus and the Cepheid were fitted out with the new apparatus Buck had designed. They were almost ready to start now. McLaurin came down the corridor and stopped near Kendall. He too smiled at the Mirans' attempt. "They've got a long way to go, Buck." "They're going a long way, clear back home, and we'll be right along. I don't think they can outdistance us." "I still don't see why you couldn't use one of those uncertainty conditions, the first degree perhaps, and annihilate our inertia." "You can't control uncertainty. By its essential character, it's beyond control." "What's that fourth degree machine of yours?" "The material energy. If it isn't controlled and utilized, uncertainty." "It is utter and utterly uncontrolled uncertainty. The matter within that field breaks down to absolutely nothing. Within, no laws whatsoever apply, but fortunately, outside the old laws of physics apply, and we can gather and use the energy which is released outside, though nothing can be done inside. Why, think, man, if I can control the uncertainty, I could do anything at all, absolutely anything. It would be a world as unreasonable as a bad dream. Think how unreasonable those manifestations we first got were." "But can't you get any control at all?" "Very little. Anyway, if I could get inertialess conditions at will, I'd be afraid of them. They'd make chemical reactions impossible in all probability, and life is chemical. 2 atoms must come into more or less violent contact before a union takes place, and cannot if they have neither momentum nor inertia. Anyway, why worry? I can't do it because I can't control this thing, and we have the extra space drive." "How does that darn thing work?" "Can't you drop the math and tell me about it?" Kendall smiled, not too readily. "Remember at first, as to the driving system, that it works on the fabric of space. Space is, in the physical sense, a fabric woven of threads of line of force from everybody in the universe, made up of fields and forces. It is elastic and can transmit strains. But anything that can transmit strains can be strained against. With the tremendous field intensities available by the material engines, I can get such fields as will dig their toes into space and push. That's the drive itself. It is accelerationless, because it enfolds us and acts equally on every atom of us. By maintaining in addition a slight artificial gravity, thanks to the intensity of those material engine fields, we can be comfortable while we accelerate at tremendous rates. That is, I think, at least allied to the Stranger's system. For the high-speed drive, I do in fact use the uncertainty. I can control it in a certain sense by determining its powers and the limits of uncertainty, whether first, second, third, or fourth degree. It advances in jumps, but on a finer plotting of the curve. You can see that each jump represents a vast series of smaller jumps. That is, there is Class A, B, C, and D, and so forth. Uncertainty of the first degree. Now, Class A first degree uncertainty involves only the deepest, broadest principles. Only they break down. One of these is the law of the speed of light. I'm sure that isn't the system the Strangers use, but I'm also sure there's no limit to the speed we can get." "Doesn't that wreck your drive system?" "No, because gravity and the fields I use in driving are first degree uncertainties of the higher classes. But at any rate it will work, and I suspect you came to say you were ready to go." "I did," McLaurin nodded. "Still stick to your original plan?" McLaurin nodded. "I think it's the best. You follow those fellows back to their system in the S Doradus, and I'll stay here in the Cepheid to protect the system. They may need some time to get out of the place here. And remember, we ought to be as decent as they were. They didn't bother the transports leaving Jupiter when they came in, only attacked the warships. We're bound to do the same, but we'll have to keep a watch on them nonetheless. So you go on ahead." They started down the corridor and came presently to the huge locks where the S Doradus and the Cepheid were berthed. The super ships lay cold and gray now, men swarming in and out with last-minute supplies, air, water, spare parts, bedding, and personal equipment. Douglas, Cole, and most of the laboratory staff would go with Kendall when he followed the strangers home. Devin and a few of the most advanced physicists would stay with McLaurin in case of need. An hour later the S Doradus rose gently, soundlessly from her berth and floated out of the open locked door. The Cepheid followed her in 5 seconds. Still under the great screen of the fort, the lashing, coruscating colors of the magnetic bombs, and the magnetic screen flashed and was iridescent. The S Doradus poked her great nose gently through the screen, and an instant later her titanically powerful material engine effortlessly discharged a great magnetic bomb, sent with the combined power of 5 atomic-powered interstellar ships. The two ships separated now. The Cepheid under McLaurin flashed ahead with sudden, terrific acceleration toward Mars, whispering through space at a speed that made it undetectable, faster than light. The S Doradus journeyed out leisurely toward the fleet of 47 Miran ships. Gresth Gkae saw the S Doradus, and as he watched the steady progress, felt sudden fear at his heart. The ship seemed so certain. At a distance of 30,000 miles, Kendall stopped. Magnetic bombs were washing his screen continuously now, seeking to exhaust the ship as all the great ships beyond poured their energy against it. A slow smile spread over Kendall's mouth as he heard the gentle hum of the barely working material engine. Carefully he aligned the nose UV beam of the S Doradus on the nearest Miran ships. Then he depressed a switch. There was no ion release before the force mirror now, just a jet of gas whirling into a half-inch field of uncertainty of the 4th degree. The matter vanished instantly in released energy so stupendous that the greatest previous UV beams had been harmless things by comparison. Material energy maintained the mirror forces. Material energy gave the power that was released, and only material energy could have stood up before it. 30,000 miles away, a Miran ship flamed instantaneously into inconceivable incandescence, vanishing almost in blue-violet light of terrific intensity. The ship reeled away, a half-molten wreck. The beam spotted 2 more ships before it winked out. Then Kendall began sending bombs. He moved up to within 2,000 miles that his aim might be accurate. They were bombs of uncertainty of the 3rd degree, the uncertainty of atomic law in bomb form. One hit the nose of the nearest ship, and a spear 5 feet in diameter glowed mistily blue for a moment. Then very easily the matter that formed the wall of the cruiser began to run and change, and presently there was only a hole and an expanding cloud of gas. 3 more followed toward it, and the hole enlarged, and another hole appeared in a bulkhead behind. Kendall made a change. For the first time there came the staccato bark of the material engine under strain as it fashioned the terrific fields of uncertainty of the ultimate degree. Abruptly they leapt out, invisible till they entered a magnetic screen, then run over with opalescent light as the energy of the field was sucked into them and released. It struck the nose of a ship, a field no larger than an apple. A titanic gout of energy burst out that was soundless in space. The ship suddenly opened back, opened like the peel of a banana, till a little nub remained at the farther end, and the metal flaps dropped back across and behind it dejectedly. A second ship was struck, and it was struck in one side, so that it was shattered like a spent firecracker. Then the Miran fleet vanished in speed. Kendall followed them. "I think," he said with a grin, "they tried to use their radio beam, but it spread too much to do anything at that distance. And they used their rotating magnetic field, which we couldn't feel, and their crumbler ray, too, of course. I wonder, are they headed for Jupiter? No, they've passed it." Faster than light, faster than energy could follow through space, or uncertainty bombs pursue, the Mirans were fleeing for home. They knew now that only in speed lay safety. Already they knew that a similar ship had appeared off Jupiter, and after wiping out Phobos and Mars stations with one bomb each, had cleared the Jovian satellites with equal terrible efficiency. In one of the fleeing ships was a broken, tired old man and his staff. Gresth Gkae looked back at the blank, distorted space behind them, at the swiftly dwindling sun, and spoke. "I was at fault, my friends. Jarth has spoken. They are the stronger and the wiser race. Farth Skalt has shown you they use space fields of intensity 100. That means the energy of the ultimate destruction. Jarth used us as his instrument of testing, only to drive and stimulate that race. I do not, nay, there is no doubt now, for look!" Plainly visible, rapidly overtaking them, the S Doradus appeared sharp and luminous on the jet of distorted space. "We cannot escape, my friends. Shall we return to Stor, or remain in space, lost?" "Let us deflect our course. At least he may not know our destination." The interstellar ship turned very slightly in her course. Plainly they saw the S Doradus flash on in a straight line, headed for a distant red glowing Mira. Gresth Gkae watched and shrugged. Silently he put the ship back on its course at its utmost speed. Parallel with them, near to them, the S Doradus flashed on. Day after day the two hurtled through space faster than light. Gradually Mira brightened and at last became a disk. Gresth Gkae slowed his ship, and Kendall, watching, slowed to match his speed. 5 billion miles from Stor, they had reached normal space speeds. Viciously the Miran fleet attacked the lone ship from Earth. Their rays, their bombs, their every weapon was flaming. Great interstellar ships flashed suddenly into speeds greater than that of light, seeking to ram and destroy the smaller ship. The S Doradus flashed in equal or greater speed and eluded them. Kendall had determined now which was the leader's ship. Gresth Gkae watched dully as his ships attempted to destroy the single small ship. He sighed in resignation and turned to walk back to the chapel aboard the ship. One last prayer to Jarth. Gresth Gkae stopped abruptly. The great ship was lurching strangely. Men shouted sudden, frightened cries. The clanking and thud of relays sounded, the shrill of alarms. Then the alarms stopped, and suddenly the whole great ship vibrated to an infinitely deep voice speaking in perfect Sthorian. The voice remarked solemnly, in great vibrant tones, that they would certainly receive news presently from the expeditions. It went on for some seconds to discuss conditions as reported in the new system. Then it stopped abruptly. An electric motor just above Gresth Gkae's head suddenly hummed into action without reason or power connection. Almost simultaneously he heard the shouts of startled men as the great locked doors began to open into space of their own accord. Bulkhead doors slipped shut as the roar of escaping air echoed in the ship. Then it was all over. Gresth Gkae ran to the control room. The Mirans there looked up at him with drawn faces. "The instruments, Gresth Gkae, the instruments." The instruments read impossible things. The motors worked without reason, the fields fluctuated, the atomic engines stopped, and the magnetic shield broke down and gripped part of the ship instead, reported the bewildered pilot. "I do not know, some strange weapon of," began the old scientist. Something luminous and huge twisted suddenly through space toward them, a bomb of uncertainty of the first degree. It wrapped the ship silently, and again strange things happened. Abruptly the ship started whirling violently, yet without centrifugal force. The heavens wheeled crazily and turned about 3 axes simultaneously. There was no gyroscopic effect to hold them. Gradually the thing died out. Then a great field seemed to catch the ship and hurl it away from its companions. Abruptly the pilot applied all his power to pull free. In vain. Gresth Gkae shook his head slowly and raised the pilot's hands from the board. "Let them do as they will. I think they mean us no real harm. Thart Kralt, they can, we know, destroy us in an instant. Perhaps he wants us to go somewhere with him." Gresth Gkae smiled sadly. "And anyway, we can do nothing." For nearly 1,000,000,000 miles the great ship was hurled through space at tremendous normal space velocity. Then abruptly it was halted, without a sign of strain or hurt. The great 20-foot UV beam on the nose of the S Doradus broke into a glowing, gentle red light. It flashed twice. There was a pause. Then it flashed 4 times. A long wait. Then 3 times. A pause, and 9 times. A wait. 4 times. A pause. 16 times. Then it stopped. A slow smile of ineffable joy spread over Gresth Gkae's face. "Jarth be praised. He can destroy, but he does not wish to. Ah, Thart Kralt, turn your spotlight toward him and flash it 25 times, for he is trying to start communications with us. Jarth is wise beyond all understanding. They were the weaker race, and they are the stronger. But also they are the better, for they could destroy, and they do not, but seek only to communicate." End of chapter 12. Log of the Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The interstellar liner Mira settled gently to Stor, having circled wide of Astor, and from her hold a cargo of the heavy Jovian elements was discharged, while a mixed stream of Solarians and Mirans came from her passenger quarters. A delegation of Mirans met the new ambassador from Sol, Commander McLaurin, and conducted him joyfully to the Central Government Group. Beside the great building a battered, scarred interstellar ship lay, her rear section a mass of great patches, rudely applied and rudely made, mere cast metal plates. Gresth Gkae welcomed Commander McLaurin to the Government Hall. "Your arrival today, Commander McLaurin, was most fortunate," he said in the interstellar language that had been developed. "For but yesterday Gresth Talak, my brother, arrived in his ship. Before we made that unfortunate expedition against your system, we waited for him, and he did not come, so we knew his ship had, like others, been lost. He arrived only yesterday, some 70 hours ago, and explained how it had come about. He too found the solar system, but he was less fortunate than I, and while exploring this uninhabited system, far out still from the central sun, where there should have been no masses of matter, one of those rare things, a giant stony meteor that even a magnetic shield will not stop, careened into the rear of his ship. Damaged badly, barely able to move, they settled to a planet. The atmosphere was breathable, the temperature mild. But while they could navigate planetary distances, they could not return. So for nearly 4½ of your years they remained there, working to repair their ship. They have done it at last, and they have returned. And best of all, after a 4-year stay there, they know all they need to know about that system of 11 planets. It is compact as yours, with an ultraviolet sun such as yours, and 4 of the planets are habitable. Together we can colonize that system. It is a system of stable heat and stable light, and it is small, yet large enough, and with the devices such as your new energy has permitted, we need never fear the stony meteors again." Gresth Gkae smiled happily. "Still better, it is inhabited only by the lowest forms of life. It is too costly to both races when Jarth sees fit to stimulate them by throwing one against the other, despite the good things that may come later." End of epilogue. End of The Ultimate Weapon by John W. Campbell.